So you want to learn how to get the most cinematic video out of your Canon R8? We're going to dive right into it today. So with this camera, we've shot a few short films with it, one of which, Ace's Wild the Storm, linked below, won my wife Best Female Director at the World's Film Festival in Cannes. And I just want to take a detailed look into the settings here, let you guys know what we used, how we got it, and how to get the best out of this camera for a film-like production. Most of this will be just for the Canon R8, but there are a lot of talking points that will apply to any camera. So here we go, let's hop into it. So why the Canon R8? It's basically performance for price. It is a budget camera with a lot of bang for the buck. It's going about $1,200 right now. It's around Christmas time 2024, so that might be a little bit of a sale. You'll have to look into that. The sensor, it's a 24 megapixel sensor, which is great for video. It's the same sensor that's in the Canon R6 Mark II and very similar to the R3. It's just not stacked. It does really great in low light. It has a fast readout, around 15 stops of dynamic range, and it'll shoot in C-Log 3. 4K, no crop, downsized from 8K, so really good picture quality. Some of the negatives are low battery life, no IBIS, that's in-body image stabilization, lack of a joystick, and the codecs, it doesn't have ALLI or All-I or RAW. It's just the IPB, which some people don't really like. I like the All-I. In this camera, I really don't notice it. The IPB picture looks really good. And weather sealing, while it is there, it's just weather resistant. It's not sealed as well as the more professional cameras are. I'm going to show you how to get around a couple of these downfalls here further in the video. So let's talk some basic settings. Got my R8 set up over here, recording the menu, so we'll be looking over here, diving into that some. We want to keep everything at 24 frames per second for cinematic, or here in America, 23.98. We're going 4K for the best quality, not 4K light, 4K standard IPB. We want our shutter speed when we're shooting to follow the 180 degree rule. Now all this is for motion blur. The 24 frames per second and the 180 degree shutter rule give you that correct motion blur when you're shooting a film to make it look cinematic and not kind of choppy or just too clear like a soap opera where there's no motion blur when there's movement. So this is just kind of general rules for cinematic film. The 180 degree rule means your shutter should be twice what your frame rate is. This camera doesn't do 1/48, but 1/50 will get you there. So 180 degree rule, shutter speed 1/50. If you're shooting at 24 frames per second, which you should be doing for cinematic film, we're not talking slow motion or any of that. This is just going out shooting a cinematic movie. So on your shutter speed, keeping it at 1/50 with a wide open aperture, you know it's going to let in too much light, especially outside. And in photography, you would change your shutter generally to help you dim that down. We can't do that in video. We have to use variable ND filters so you can keep your shutter. These are the ones I've been using. I'll recommend them down below as well. They're by K&F Concept, and they're variable NDs. I have one that's a quarter stop black mist that just kind of helps soften the image. I use that for the dream scene in the storm. And then I have just a regular variable ND. And these are, if you're shooting cinematic video, they're just a must-have unless you're always shooting indoor and controlled lighting. Your aperture, you want it generally as low as possible. The standard for most things is 2.8 aperture if you want that shallow depth of field where the background's got the bokeh blur and your subject sharp. You can go lower, 1.8, 1.2. You get in the film, they measure that in T-stops, not f-stops. But for our basic concern with standard lenses and this camera, a lens that goes down to at least 2.8 would be ideal. If you don't have that, keep your aperture as low as you can for that kind of subject separation. ISO, this camera has a base ISO of 800. And that is the lowest you want to have your ISO go on to get the best dynamic range out of this camera. If you go lower than that, you're going to have some issues. And if you go too high, you're going to have some issues. I like to keep it between 800 and somewhere in the 3000s. And I've had really good luck with that. Shooting night scenes and such, this camera handles high ISO really well. And white balance. When you're shooting video, you always want to set your white balance. Photography, auto white balance works great. The camera does really good. But if you're shooting video and your light source changes, you have a cloud go in front of the sun, or even somebody walk in front of a bright light, it can pick up a different white balance based on the surroundings. So you want to set it to tungsten if you're indoors, and tungsten light, shade, cloud, daylight, fluorescent light. You just always want to make sure you have a white balance dialed in. And that kind of covers the basic settings for getting cinematic footage. We're going to dive into a little bit more of the advanced stuff now. So for this camera, it does shoot C-Log 3, and for color grading and get the most dynamic range, that's generally what you're going to want to use. So you come over here, C-Log 3 on, and the color space I recommend is Cinema Gamut. It's going to give you the best color space for color grading. I wouldn't mess with the other two generally. And I keep my characteristics all set to 0. I'm going to do any sharpening or saturation or anything of that in post-production. View assist. You want to have view assist on, otherwise you're going to get that C-Log look, flat, no contrast, no saturation. It just makes it harder to film. View assist throws on a kind of LUT to make it more how it would look in Rec 709. Just help you work the camera and see how things are going to look after you color correct your footage. There's another setting on this camera. I have a whole video on that. I'll link it down below. It is also 10-bit video recording. This camera records in 10-bit, which is really good. They have better now. They got 12 and 16-bit, but 10-bit is really good to prevent banding and just get some really good colors. A lot better than, say, your old 8-bit footage, where, especially in the blue skies, you see those kind of bands. So this is a great camera for that as well. And HDR PQ is a 10-bit recording for recording in HDR. And this works really well. Go check out that video. But I would say if you're going to use it over log, you want to be in a really controlled environment without really bright highlights. It handles shadows amazing, and the colors and such just have a really natural, pleasing tone to them. But if you're not in a controlled environment and you have a lot of highlights, it doesn't handle highlights very well. So for most situations, I prefer shooting in log. Couple other settings that I'd like to go into. I like to have my lens corrections on, peripheral ilium on, focus breathing. A lot of lenses now allow you to help control focus breathing digitally, so I always have that on, and chromatic aberration on. And focus breathing with cheaper lenses or lenses that aren't cinematic, or when you focus from something close to far, you get a little bit of a zoom effect back and forth, and that's really kind of telling people that this wasn't shot on a professional lens. It's a telltale of kind of amateur work. But we have some lenses to recommend that'll help curb that, and we got this setting here in the camera, which actually works pretty well. Digital image stabilization. I prefer to leave it off. I don't like the digital image stabilization. I would recommend using lenses with built-in stabilization. The 35mm lens 1.8 STM that I'll recommend has stabilization, and it works really good. Just handheld, I was able to get most of my shots for most of my films. So this camera does have some pretty advanced features for being a budget camera, and one of those is your zebras. And this is where you're going to get your proper exposure. It's going to put some hash marks on the screen, either left or right, depending on how you have these numbers set. So I like to run zebra pattern 1 and 2. Zebra pattern 1, you want to set to 40% plus or minus 5% for your skin tone. So as you adjust your exposure, when you have the proper exposure on your skin tones, you're going to get those you're going to get those lines one way or the other. I can't remember right now, but I'll put a tag on the video here. And zebra 2, 90% is just going to be your highlight alert. You'll get those lines running the other direction when you're about to blow out your highlights. So really important for getting proper exposure, especially when you're running C-Log 3, because it's kind of hard to tell if you're over bright or under bright. Always better to overexpose in C-Log a little bit to help with the shadows, but you want to protect those highlights. That's where that 90% comes in. Autofocus. This camera has amazing autofocus. Right now I have it set up for wildlife, but generally when I'm running video, I'll have it set to auto, eye detection auto, and switching track subjects, I leave it at 0 because I don't want it to switch too fast. And you see over here, movie servo autofocus track sensitivity, I have it to -2 for the same reason. And I have my speed down a couple notches. That just kind of helps. If I'm shooting a video, I'm going subject to subject. I don't want it to snap like that. I kind of want it to look like I pulled focus. Which brings us to the other, and that is you can run manual focus. And this camera has some settings for that as well. You can do focus peaking. Now you have to turn your zebras off. I don't know why it doesn't allow both. So let's go back here. We turn our zebras off. And now we can pull up focus peaking. I like it level high, color red. But with manual focus peaking on, you'll get red lines highlighting what you have in focus. And then we have a focus guide. And that is just wherever you put your focus point. As you change focus, you can see the guide moving. And when your 3 little triangles line up, there you go, sharp focus. So you have several things with this camera to help you with manual focusing. Most of the time I run auto, but if you have a problem with it, switch to manual, you can nail your shot. And I'll show you another tip right now to help with manual focusing as well. And that is setting up some custom buttons. I'll show you how I have mine set up. So over here in this tab, you come to number 3, custom buttons. And we're looking at the film side. So I have my up arrow. You can just click on it there and select what you want. To magnify, which helps out a lot. You can press it twice to really get in there close and get your focus and then pop back out. I have my left arrow set to zebras. My right arrow set to ISO because there's no ISO dial. And my down arrow set to white balance. So those are the things that I would want to change on the fly as I'm shooting video, and having those set up there just really helps out. And the top button, which is multifunction, I have set for my focus peaking. So all you got to do is go to that menu, tab 3, custom buttons, and set those up however you like. One more hint to help overcome one of the shortfalls of this, or a couple more hints. The low battery. Turn airplane mode on. I have it off right now. Turn your airplane mode on. It's going to help out a lot with the battery. I've shot a few short films now with this camera, and on like a 5-hour shoot, I'll change the battery one time. Now that's not continuous record, obviously, but just typical normal short film, shooting for 5 hours, changing scenes, shooting a clip, turning it off, starting again. 2 batteries generally can get me through about 5 hours. With the airplane mode on, if I had it off, generally before I learned that tip, I'd carry 2 extra batteries. So this isn't an all-day shooter unless you get a battery grip, or you can plug an external battery into it to help you shoot all day. But just for short films, works really well. The battery's not that big of a deal. And another tip for you guys is turn touch and drag autofocus settings on. And that's going to make this screen right here your joystick. So we solved the problems of the joystick and we solved the problems of the low battery. This is going to let you move your focus points around. Then once you got all that dialed in, so normally I like to set it to manual mode, dial in all these settings, come over here to your function tab, and I believe it's tab 5, custom shooting, register settings to either your C1 or your C2. So anytime you get ready to shoot a cinematic film, you just switch over to video, switch to C1 or C2, whichever you set it to. All these settings you've dialed in are there and you're ready to rock and roll. So now that we've gone over these settings, the other thing you really need to consider is the lens you're going to use. I'm going to give you a couple budget options, a couple mid-tier options, and then some higher end options, as well as places to look just for some third party kind of out of the norm but work really well. So the Storm and my other short films, I've mostly shot on the Canon RF 35mm 1.8 STM. Right now at Christmas it's $449, usually $499, and 35mm is, if you're only going to get one lens, it is, I think, the lens you should get because it's a storytelling lens. You can come in, get a close-up, pull back, get a wide shot. It really is considered the storytelling lens. So typically you'd want a 24, 35, a 50, and a 75 or 80 to cover your bases, but you can do a lot with just the 35, and they make budget primes in that whole range. But if I was looking to get 2 primes in that range, I wouldn't do it. I would step up to the lens I have on here now, because 2 of those lenses is going to cost you what this one does. I have a video looking at this lens. I'm going to do more on the future, but it is really good. It's really good for video. That's the RF 28-70 2.8. Now, the other was 1.8. This is 2.8, but the other primes, the 35, 50, 24, 1.8s, I had to stop down to 2.8 to get them sharp. This thing's sharp at 2.8. It's quiet, it's weather sealed, not weather resistant. The same weather sealing they put on L series lenses. It has some L glass implements. That's Canon's luxury line. So the picture is really good. The contrast and colors are really good. And it handles focus breathing really well. You can barely tell you have focus breathing in this lens at all, making it look a lot more professional. So it is a little on the pricier side. Right now it's $1,100. But I compared it to all my primes. I had the 24, 35, 50, and 80, and it was as good or better than all of those. For color rendition in video and contrast rendition, it was better. So before I got 2 of those primes, I would look at getting this bad boy right here. If you're stepping up from that, I have some recommendations. I haven't personally used these lenses, but from watching other reviews and just the specs, it's kind of where I would do my research to lean into. That's the RF 24-70 f2.8 L series IS-USM, coming in at $2,100, and the RF 28-70 f2L USM coming in at $2,600. Beyond that, I would start looking at the Canon Cinema Glass. Now, Cinema Glass is a little different. It measures things in T-stops, not f-stops, but they're basically the same as far as aperture openings. They just measure it that way in the film industry. Those are going to be full manual lenses, so you won't have autofocus, but they make up for that in other ways. So generally, you get a set of cinema lenses in primes, 24, 50, and so on, and they'll all be the same size, same weight, and have the same filter thread. This means that if you have filters, you can just hop from one lens to the other without worrying about stepping up or stepping down or having different filters. And if you're going on a gimbal, they should be the same weight, so you don't have to rebalance your gimbal every time you change it. And really, there's no focus breathing at all because they're cinema lenses. Optically, If you're looking at a 35 Canon cinema lens RFL series versus a non-cinema lens, optically they're going to be about the same, but those other bonuses are why you would look into that. Beyond that, you can get an RF EF adapter to put the old EF lenses on there, and that can save you money as far as using some of the older EF lenses. Now, the autofocus I have found isn't quite as quick on the EF when you're using that adapter, but you can also get some other cinema lenses from companies such as Rokinon and Suri, and they make really good budget-friendly cinema lenses. They're manual anyway, so you're not going to miss that autofocus. They're really good lenses, and they'll save you a pretty penny beyond going and getting Canon Cinema Glass. So just a basic look at lenses there. And the other things to remember when you're looking for cinematic video is the lighting is going to be key. So if you want to shoot these cinematic movies, really go watch some YouTube videos on light diffusion and shooting in the golden or blue hour. That's going to give you the softest lighting and really help you to get that cinematic look. And then beyond that, we have color grading. That's the next thing that's going to get you there. And I'm going to give you guys a quick crash test tutorial on how to get your log footage from your camera color corrected and looking cinematic. This is just real quick, down and dirty, but there are some features in DaVinci that will get you there. We can do a whole deep dive in the color grading. There's thousands of hours of learning to be done there. But you want to go shoot your short film today, get it looking cinematic. We're going to show you how to get it done. All right, so we're in DaVinci Resolve. This is version 19. I have the studio version, but you can do most things in the free version. This, in my opinion, is the best video editing color grading software out there. So we want to come over here to this gear, and we want to make sure we have everything set up. This is 4K, so I'm going to change my resolution to 4K, and we have it set to the frame rate we shot, 24 frames per second. Then I'm going to come down to color management. DaVinci YRGB color managed. I'm going to change it to that. And our output color space will be Rec 709 because that's the standard. Save that. Come over here to the clip we're using. Right click, input color space. Sometimes it'll detect it. It doesn't detect the Canon R8, so we'll come down to Canon. What'd we shoot it in? Canon C-Log3 Cinema Gamut. Bam! It is that easy. So now we want to do a color grade. Let's come over here to our color grade tab. Search Film Look Creator. Drop that node on here. Now this is the paid version, but look how quick that was. We got a few presets. Can do a bleach bypass. I rather like the bleach bypass look. We got a couple different films to choose from. You want to do a split tone, kind of the teal and orange. Come down here to split tone, enable, and change the amount. You can change the hue angle, give you the hue of teal or orange that you want, and you can pivot it around middle gray. I just use my eye to see what looks good. Tons you can learn here, but just quick, down and dirty. We went from that to that. We got a nice film look. So if you only have the free version and you want to get some type of look like that, there's lots of tools in here as well. Just start with taking out a little contrast and saturation and adding a little teal in our shadows. That's the lift. Gain is our highlights, adding a little orange. If you come over here, this is a curves. If you grab this, you can lift your blacks. Real quick and dirty. Before, after, film look in DaVinci. I recommend if you want to get in a cinematic film, do a lot deeper dive. There's tons of videos. I'll be doing more in the future, but there we go. We took our C-Log footage to something usable that quick and easy. All right, that's it for the day, everybody. I hope these settings help you out and these tips and tricks. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like and subscribe button. Lots of information down in the description. And until next time, thanks for watching.